Hi everybody! The topic of the day today is mezcal. So yesterday we talked about tequila, which is one of the biggest spirits in the world that everybody's heard of, made from agave. But another spirit that people may not have heard so much about is mezcal, which is also made from agaves. In the previous video I did yesterday, we talked a bit about the agaves, these big succulent plants that grow in Mexico, and how they are basically chopped up and cooked so that they can ferment and then be distilled into tequila. Now, the difference between tequila and mezcal is that mezcal is a slightly different process in terms of how the agaves are treated. And it's a very rural spirit, and it tends to be made in quite small quantities by quite small rural producers. There aren't these big names, like Patron and Don Julio that are making sort of mass volumes of mezcal. It tends to be quite an artisanal product, and until recently, it was always just made in small batches by small producers. However, in more recent times, what's happened is Del Maguey has been a kind of umbrella brand that has been used for mezcal made by a number of producers. So basically a number of producers in Mexico have kind of come together and they have provided their mezcal to be sold under the name of Del Maguey. So you might have heard more, even if you've never tried mezcal, you may have seen or heard of Del Maguey because Del Maguey recently got bought by Pernod-Ricard. So that's a little bit about kind of the branding of mezcal, because there aren't really that many major brands worldwide of mezcal. So Del Maguey is probably the main one. But going back to the agaves and how they are treated and why it's different to tequila, the main reason it's different is because unlike when tequila is made, when the agaves are chopped up and then baked, they're not baked in the hornos, a.k.a. the ovens that they are baked in when tequila is made. Instead of doing it that way, what these small producers do is they actually bury the agave in soil, in the earth, and create a kind of fire pit in the ground and basically cover the agaves in earth and other agave fibers, kind of like the shreddings of agave. And so basically the overall taste of mezcal is really different to tequila, because this process of burying the agaves in the soil to bake them, it gives this really, really smoky flavor. And it's interesting, always comparing agave spirits to wine. I always say to people, if you're a wine lover and you love the smoky petrol kind of notes of Riesling and you've never tried tequila, you might try mezcal and really enjoy it, because that's what you can get with mezcal. You can get this crazy, really unusual earthy note that you would get from tequila anyway, because that tends to come just from the agave, but there's this smokiness and it can be really, really prominent. So it is a really, really unusual spirit, and it's definitely one that when you've never tried mezcal, when you actually have a sort of dram of it and you just put your nose to it, it can be such a shock to people who don't know what to expect. So partly why bartenders have come to really be fanatical about mezcal is because as a cocktail ingredient, it can really add another dimension to your cocktail. Because if you think of some of the kind of the kind of classic cocktails like old fashions and smoky old fashions, where people are trying to add another dimension to the cocktail with the smokiness, imagine doing that with a clear spirit like mezcal. Mezcal isn't always aged. Like, it doesn't need to be aged to have smokiness. You can age mezcal, but it doesn't need to, because naturally it has that smokiness. So in terms of other aspects of how it's made, obviously I've mentioned the main thing, which is that it's buried in the earth and it's baked in the earth. The other thing is that you can make mezcal from pretty much any agave type. So it's not like tequila, where I said tequila has to be made from 100% blue agave. Mezcal is not as strictly regulated, so you can use different types of agave to make mezcal. One thing I will say though is that of all the varieties of agave that are out there, the one that does tend to be used most to make mezcal is a variety that is commonly known as ESPADÍN. So you will often see that being used. If you actually read the bottle, it might say that that was the one that was used. And then another thing in terms of regulation of mezcal is that it's not really got the same geographical appellations, denomination of origin that I mentioned yesterday. So yesterday I mentioned that tequila has specific denominations of origin within the 5 states, which are listed in the other video. Now, with mezcal, those areas where it can be made are different. And what you will find actually is that most mezcal producers are actually in the state of Oaxaca. So it's not quite the same as tequila in that regard either. And then finally, just in terms of age statements, I mentioned the age statements that tequila can be. So when it comes to mezcal, they use the word joven, which is the equivalent of what I described yesterday as blanco, which is tequila that is unaged. So if the mezcal is not aged, it will say mezcal joven on it. So it just means it hasn't had any barrel aging at all. If it has been aged for 2 to 12 months, same as tequila, it will be called mezcal reposado. Just like yesterday I said reposado means rested in Spanish, and same with tequila, if it's reposado, it's 2 to 12 months old. And then if it is more than a year old, in mezcal terms, in regulations, it would be añejo. So that is basically the same as tequila. I was just checking that. So yeah, so over a year old, it will be añejo. But just something to be aware of is that with mezcal, you won't necessarily see as much of the añejo mezcal on the market. And that goes back to what I said earlier, is that there's so much intricacy in the bouquet of an unaged mezcal that in a way it's kind of redundant to age the mezcal, because even the unaged mezcal is really, really interesting from a kind of flavor and aroma perspective. So in terms of how you would use mezcal in cocktails and drinks, you would probably use it in the similar way to tequila, and all that would happen is you would just have a really unusual kind of multi-dimensional cocktail. Like, for example, if you made a margarita with a mezcal, it would taste similar to a margarita made from tequila, but you would have, as I mentioned, this really interesting note to the cocktail, that smokiness that you wouldn't normally get with a tequila cocktail. So it is a really interesting spirit. You can get mezcals that have a bit of sweetness to them. They're always going to have earthy vegetal notes to them, same as tequila. But the thing that will really strike you if you're new to mezcal, it will be that smokiness. And it can be also a kind of petrol aroma as well. So it's a really, really interesting spirit. So next time you go to any kind of Mexican restaurant or bar, ask them if they've got a mezcal on their shelf. And I would try a joven, as I say, and joven is the equivalent to tequila blanco. Go for the unaged one, and then you'll get a better idea of how it is, expressive of the agave. And if you're looking for a specific brand because you want to buy a bottle, try the Del Maguey. There's lots of different expressions of Del Maguey, or there's another brand called Ilegal, and see what you think. And if you're looking for a third brand, the only other one I can think of off the top of my head would be maybe Montelobos. I don't know what market you are in watching this, but certainly within the UK, they are 3 brands that are available in the UK. So look out for them. Now, if you are a big mezcal fan and you've got a particular favourite, please drop your recommendation in the comments. Cheers.